The desert doesn't just offer silence. It offers a particular kind of emptiness that demands to be filled. I arrived at the Obsidian Plateau late on a Friday, the sun already dipping below the jagged horizon, painting the sky in bruises of violet and deep burnt orange. My car was coated in a fine layer of dust, a testament to the miles of nothingness I'd traveled to get here. I wanted a weekend where the only voice I heard was my own, and the only expectations were the ones I set for myself. I needed to shed the skin of my city life, the deadlines, the noise, the constant draining hum of people who wanted things from me. Here, among the ancient stones and the shifting sands, I thought I could finally find a version of myself that wasn't performing for an audience. But the desert has a way of twisting your plans. It doesn't just give you peace. It mirrors what you're actually carrying inside. And as I stepped out onto the glass-walled terrace of my rental, I realized I wasn't nearly as tired of being watched as I had told myself. Before we dive deeper into the heat of this desert night, take a quick moment to support the journey. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell. It's a small gesture that helps us keep these stories coming, ensuring you never miss a single beat of the tales we weave. Now, let's return to the plateau. The air was cooling rapidly, that sharp, dry chill that follows a blistering day. I poured myself a glass of heavy, dark Malbec and let the wind tug at the edges of my silk wrap. My lodge was perched on a ridge, overlooking a small canyon where a few other structures were tucked into the rocks. Directly across from me, maybe 50 yards away, a fire was roaring. It wasn't the polite, controlled flame of a tourist's fire pit. It was a hungry, wild blaze that cast long, flickering shadows against the canyon walls. Around it, I saw them. 5 figures, silhouettes at first, then sharpening into focus as my eyes adjusted to the growing dark. They looked like they belonged to the landscape, rough-hewn, solid, and completely at ease in the middle of nowhere. I watched them for a long time, the way they moved with a casual, predatory grace. They were laughing, the sound carrying faintly on the wind, a low rumble of masculine energy that felt like a physical weight in the air. I could have gone inside. I could have closed the heavy curtains and turned on the soft amber lights of the bedroom. But the solitude I'd sought suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to see if the world still reacted to me when I wasn't trying. I stepped closer to the edge of the terrace, leaning against the cold metal railing. I let my wrap slip just an inch or two, exposing the curve of a shoulder to the moonlight. I didn't have to wait long. One of them, the tallest, with a frame that seemed to hold up the sky, looked up. He didn't just glance. He locked on. Even from that distance, I felt the intensity of his stare. It was like a spark jumping a gap, a sudden electric connection that made the breath catch in my throat. He said something to the others, and slowly, one by one, they turned. They didn't wave, they didn't shout, they just watched. It was a silent conversation, a challenge issued across the void. I held his gaze, my heart beginning a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I stretched a slow, deliberate movement that felt like a cat waking up from a long sleep, and then I turned my back on them and walked into the house, leaving the door unlatched. The interior of the lodge was all shadows and sharp angles. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need them. The fire from across the way cast enough of a glow to see the outlines of the furniture. I set my wine glass down on the stone counter and waited. The silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was vibrating. I heard the crunch of boots on the gravel path first, then the sound of the heavy wooden door creaking on its hinges. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. The air in the room changed, becoming thick and charged with a presence that seemed to swallow the space around me. He was there. I could feel the heat radiating from him, the scent of cedarwood, wood smoke, and something raw and primal. "You're a long way from the city," he said. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated in my very bones. It wasn't a question. It was an observation. I turned slowly, leaning back against the counter. He was even more imposing up close. His eyes were dark, clever, and filled with a hunger that he wasn't bothering to hide. "Maybe I came here to find something the city couldn't give me," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. He took a step closer, invading my personal space with a confidence that was both terrifying and intoxicating. "And did you find it?" I reached out, my fingers grazing the rough fabric of his shirt. "I think it just walked through my door." He didn't hesitate. His hand came up, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw with a touch that was surprisingly gentle, yet firm. "You're playing a dangerous game, inviting a stranger in like this. You don't know what I'm capable of." "Maybe that's why I did it," I whispered. The tension snapped. He pulled me toward him, and for a moment, the world was nothing but the taste of him and the strength of his arms around me. We moved toward the bedroom, a choreographed dance of heat and desperation. I pushed him back onto the bed, wanting to be the one in control, wanting to see how he reacted to my touch. He let me. He lay there, his eyes never leaving mine, a smirk playing on his lips as I explored the terrain of his body. His skin was warm, his muscles taut like coiled springs. I took my time, savoring the way his breath hitched when my hands moved over him, the way his fingers dug into the sheets as the tension built. But just as the fire between us was reaching a breaking point, a sound from the living area made me freeze. A low, rhythmic thud of multiple footsteps. Then a voice, smooth and mocking. "Elias, you always were one for getting ahead of the pack." I looked up, my heart hammering. In the doorway stood the other four. They were framed by the light of the moon, a collective of shadowed strength. There was the one who had spoken leaner, with a sharp aristocratic face and eyes that seemed to see everything. Beside him was a man with a wilder look, hair a bit longer, a grin that promised trouble. Then the two others, broader, quieter, like twin pillars of stone. Elias didn't look surprised. He just chuckled, a deep sound that rumbled against my legs. "I didn't hear you knock," he said, though he didn't move to stop them. The lean one stepped into the room, his eyes moving over me with an appreciative slow burn. The door was open. It felt like an invitation for everyone. I should have been afraid. I should have felt exposed. But instead, a rush of adrenaline flooded my system, sharper and more potent than anything I'd ever felt. The room was suddenly full of them, their heat, their voices, their sheer, overwhelming presence. I stood up, the silk wrap falling away, completely, and looked at them. I wasn't a victim here. I was the center of a storm I had summoned. "Well," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room, "are you going to stand there all night, or are you going to join us?" The air seemed to ignite. They moved as one, a coordinated shift of gravity. The lean one, Julian, took my hand, his touch cool and refined. The wild one, Kale, was behind me in an instant, his breath hot against the nape of my neck. The others, the silent giants, took their places at the foot of the bed, their gazes heavy and unwavering. It was a symphony of sensation. Julian's hands were precise, exploring with a clinical, focused intensity that made my skin tingle. Kale was all fire and motion, his movements erratic and exciting, keeping me off balance. Elias stayed where he was, watching it all with a proprietary pride. He reached out, his hand settling on my waist, grounding me in the middle of the chaos. "I told you it wouldn't be easy," he murmured, his voice lost in the collective breath of the room. The night became a blur of motion and sound. I was lost in a sea of them, every sense overwhelmed. There was the smell of the desert rain that had started to fall outside, the rhythmic drumming on the roof providing a heartbeat for our movements. There was the sound of their voices, whispered commands, low groans of approval, the sharp intake of breath as we pushed each other further. I felt every hand, every shift in weight, every surge of energy. It was a shared experience, a collective letting go of everything but the immediate, physical present. Julian leaned in close, his lips brushing my ear. "You have a lot of fire in you," he whispered. "We're gonna see how long it takes to burn." Out, laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "You can try." We moved through the hours like they were nothing. The desert outside was cold and unforgiving, but inside the lodge, it was a furnace. I found myself responding to each of them in different ways, matching Julian's precision, meeting Kale's intensity, sinking into the steady, unwavering strength of the others. It wasn't just about the physical. It was about the power of being completely seen and completely accepted in all my hunger and all my desire. As the first hints of gray began to bleed into the eastern sky, the energy in the room shifted. The wild, frantic pace slowed, deepening into something more profound and lingering. We were all exhausted, our bodies slick with sweat, our breathing synchronized in the quiet aftermath. They didn't leave. They stayed, a tangle of limbs and shared warmth on the oversized bed. Elias pulled me close, his arm a heavy, protective weight across my chest. "You're not what I expected," he admitted, his voice soft now, the edge gone. "What did you expect?" I asked, my eyes heavy with sleep. "Someone who wanted to be rescued," he said. "Not someone who wanted to be the storm." I smiled, closing my eyes. The desert was silent again, but the silence was different now. It was full. I was satisfied. I had come here looking for a way to feel alive, and I had found it in the most unexpected way possible. I had stepped into the wild, and instead of being consumed by it, I had become a part of it. The sun eventually rose, flooding the room with a harsh golden light that showed every bruise, every scratch, every mark of the night's intensity. We moved slowly, a group of survivors of a beautiful wreck. There were no awkward goodbyes, no promises of phone calls that wouldn't happen. There was just a shared understanding, a recognition of what had passed between us. As they gathered there, things and headed back toward their own lodge, Julian paused at the door. He looked back at me, a faint, respectful smile on his face. "If you ever find yourself back in this part of the world," he said, "don't bother with the door. We'll know you're here." I watched them walk away through the glass wall, 5 figures disappearing into the shimmering heat of the morning. I was alone again, but the solitude didn't feel like a cage anymore. It felt like a choice. I picked up my wine glass, now empty and stained, and looked out at the vast, indifferent desert. I had shed my skin, just like I'd wanted, but the new one felt stronger, more resilient, and infinitely more dangerous. The weekend was mine, but it wasn't just a weekend anymore. It was a pivot point, a reminder that sometimes the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself completely in the presence of others. To let go of the control you think you need and see what happens when the fire is allowed to burn unchecked. If you were standing on that terrace, looking out at that fire, what would you have done? Would you have pulled the curtains tight and stayed in the safety of the dark? Or would you have stepped into the light and seen where the night took you? The desert is full of stories, and this was just one of them. What's yours? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear how you handle the heat. And if this story resonated with you, if it made your heart beat just a little bit faster, remember to subscribe, and stay tuned. There are many more tales to tell, many more nights to explore, and I want you there for every single one of them. Until next time, keep the fire burning. The day stretched out ahead of me, long and golden. I spent it wandering the ridges, my body aching, in a way that felt like a trophy. I thought about the city, about the people who thought they knew me, and I realized they didn't know the half of it. They knew the woman who met deadlines and answered emails. They didn't know the woman who could command a room of strangers with a single look. They didn't know the woman who wasn't afraid of the dark dot. As I packed my bags on Sunday evening, the desert seemed smaller, more intimate. I realized that the nothingness I had come here to find was actually everything. It was. The potential for connection, the raw reality of human desire, and the power of a shared moment. I drove away as the sun was setting again, the bruises of violet and orange returning to the sky. But this time, I wasn't running away from anything. I was driving towards something new. The road stretched out like a ribbon of black silk under the emerging stars. I rolled down the windows, letting the cool night air rush in, smelling of sage and freedom. I thought about the five of them, probably sitting around another fire, their voices low and steady. I knew I would see them again, not because of a plan or a promise, but because some connections are written into the landscape itself. Some fires never really go out. They just wait for the right wind to kick them back into a roar. And as the lights of the city began to flicker on the horizon, a pale imitation of the stars above, I felt a secret smile touch my lips. I was going back, but I wasn't the same. I had a piece of the desert inside me now. I had the heat of that room, the weight of those hands, and the memory of a night where I was more than just a name or a face. I was a force, and the world had better be ready for what comes next. In the quiet of the car, I whispered to the empty air, "Try me." And for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly who I was talking to. I was talking to the world. I was talking to myself. And I was ready for whatever the next chapter held. Because once you've danced in the heart of a storm, the gentle breeze of everyday life just isn't enough anymore. You start looking for the lightning, you start craving the thunder. And you know, deep down, that you have the power to bring it all crashing down whenever you choose. The desert is a mirror, they say. It shows you what you're made of. I looked in that mirror and I liked what I saw. I saw a woman who could hold her own, who could invite the wild in and make it feel at home. I saw someone who wasn't afraid to ask for what she wanted and wasn't afraid to take it when it was offered. That's the real magic of Obsidian Plateau. It doesn't just give you a weekend away. It gives you yourself back. So as the city gates opened and the noise began to rise, I held on to that silence, that full, heavy, satisfied silence. I carried it with me like a shield. I knew that no matter how loud the world got, I had a place I could go in my mind, a ridge where the fire was always burning and the door was always unlatched. A place where I was the storm, and the storm was beautiful. That is the power of a story. It doesn't just end when the words stop. It lives on in the way you breathe, the way you walk, and the way you look at the person across the room. It changes the rhythm of your heart. And if this story changed yours, then it did its job. We're all just travelers in the desert looking for a fire to sit by. I'm glad you chose mine for a while. Stay curious, stay hungry, and never ever be afraid to invite the strangers in. You never know which one of them might be the one to finally show you who you really are. The night is long, and there are so many more stories waiting to be told. I'll see you at the next campfire. Until then, watch the horizon and listen for the wind. It might just be calling your name.